Here is another tier list that I have made, and this time we are going to rank all the popular extra deck monsters. We have generic synchro monsters, we have generic Xyz monsters, and generic link monsters. And the reason why there aren't any fusion monsters is because there aren't really any good generic fusion monsters that are seeing a lot of play right now. We do have some generic fusion monsters in the game, like Mundragon or the Trish fusion, but those aren't really seeing a lot of play. And all of the cards over here are taken from the popularity ranking of ranked duels in the Duel Links game itself. So these cards are in fact seeing a lot of play in high ranked, in ranked above platinum. So I guess let's begin. And also the ranking of these cards aren't based only on how good the card itself is. I'm also ranking them based on how valuable they are for new players and also experienced players to invest their gems and money on. So even if a card is very good, it might be only used in a very small amount of decks and only good in a certain meta, which is not really a good pick if you're trying to invest for a long-term generic extra deck monster. So I will also be taking that into account as well. So the first card here is Dark Rebellion Xyz Dragon. So what this card does is it is a generic rank 4 monster. It only takes 2 level 4 monsters to Xyz summon this card, and it can detach 2 materials, and one monster your opponent controls will lose half of its attack, and this card will gain that lost attack. So what this card basically does is allow it to beat over basically any monster your opponent controls, and also deal quite a bit of battle damage. In fact, it always deals 2500 battle damage every time because of how the math works out. If your opponent loses half its attack and you gain half, you basically always have 2500 attack more than your opponent because it itself has 2500 attack itself. And this is just a really good rank 4 Xyz monster. If you're going second and you're trying to push for a game, you can use this card to deal quite a bit of battle damage and basically always guarantee to beat over your opponent's monster. I would put it in an A tier. I wouldn't put it in S because there is better rank 4 Xyz monsters that you can get into. So yeah, A tier will be best for Dark Rebellion. Next card is Decode Talker. So this is a generic link 3 that takes 2 or more effect monsters, and it gains attack based on the number of cards that it points to. It gains 500 attack for each. And you can also tribute a monster it points to negate an effect that targets your own card. So it doesn't have to target itself. You can negate effects that target your other cards. Maybe an MST that is trying to destroy your back row. The Code Talker will be able to negate that. But even if it says that it tributes a monster it points to, it only allows you to tribute monsters that are owned by yourself. So even though there is a link arrow that points to your opponent's side of the field, you cannot tribute your opponent's monster to use its effect. You can only tribute your own monsters because that's how the ruling works, even though it doesn't necessarily explain that you must tribute your own monsters. It doesn't have that in the text, but it is how the ruling works. So you can only tribute your own monsters. So this card is okay. I mean, it is good in certain decks like Infinities because they really want to protect their own back row from being destroyed by generic back row removal. But in other decks, while this card is pretty generic, it doesn't really do a lot other than provide some kind of protection to your own cards. But it's not bad. And yeah, it is also good in some dedicated cyber strategies like Code Talker, but other than that, this card is not really that useful. But I'll put it in a B tier because it's still really easy to summon and it is just a decent generic link free monster. Okay, next up we have Cypher Dragon. So when we talk about Cypher Dragon, we will also have to talk about Full Armor Photon Dragon and Cypher Blade Dragon because all three of these cards are always used together in a same package because when you exceed summon Cyber Dragon using two level 8 monsters, you can rank it up using itself to a full armor and then rank it into a Cyber Blade Dragon. So you can basically summon all three of them within the same turn using the same monsters. So what this allows you to do is destroy two cards because Full Armor Photon Dragon destroys a face up card your opponent controls, and Cyber Blade Dragon destroys any card your opponent controls. So by just having two rank 8, just having two level 8 monsters on your field, you can basically pop two cards and have a 3200 attack monster on your field. That is really, really good. And also, if you're in a really desperate situation, if your opponent has a monster that can't be destroyed by card effects, you can always use the effect of Cypher Dragon to steal it to your side of the field. But if you do that, you cannot attack with other monsters directly except for itself. So it does prevent you from going for an easy OTK. So while this combo is really, really good in certain decks like Photon, they can make this trio of monsters really easily and repetitively. They can make them twice every turn or even 3 times if they have the extra deck space. And also, decks like a Mech Knight that play a lot of level 8 monsters can play this package. But in terms of how useful this package is in general, I would say it is not as generic as the other cards that we are going to talk about. But it is quite good, so I'll put it in the same tier as Decode Talker. So these cards are pretty good, but they're best to use in some very certain decks. They're not good in any deck that you could play. So I'll put them in B tier. It's still not bad. The cards are definitely very good, but in terms of how you should invest your gems on generic cards that you could use in every single deck, these aren't the best picks. Yeah, I would say B tier is the most suitable. Okay, next card, Abyss Dweller. So Abyss Dweller is a rank 4 monster that can prevent your opponent from activating any graveyard effects. It is also a quick effect, so you can use this effect during your opponent's turn, and it is also really, really easy to summon because compared to rank 8s like Galaxy Eyes Photon, the Photon package, level 4 monsters are a lot easier to have on field. And Abyssrella also perfectly counters a lot of meta decks. If you use its effect, you single-handedly turn off a lot of graveyard effects. And a lot of meta decks just use a lot of graveyard effects, and this single card just turns them off. So, really good card. Would I put it in S tier? Maybe. But I'll put it in A tier right now because its usefulness does depend on the meta. So if the meta doesn't really have a lot of graveyard effects, this card will be less useful. But there are a lot of good decks that use the graveyard, so I think it still deserves an A tier. Okay. Next card is the Sky Prison. So this is another rank 8, but instead of having an offensive effect, this card locks your opponent out of the graveyard. They can't special summon from the graveyard, and also it itself cannot be destroyed by card effects. It is still a good rank 8, and again, like a Bestola, it does depend on the meta whether or not this card will be useful. But it being a rank 8 also limits the usefulness of this card because not every deck could make rank 8 monsters. I would say I would put this one rank lower than the Galaxy package because if you're going for a rank 8, the Galaxy package is probably better. So I will put this in C tier. But it is quite good against just very specific decks like the Photon Mirror match. But yeah, it is still quite niche in its applications. Okay, next card is Nightmare Phoenix, a generic link 2 that allows you to discard a card from your hand and destroy a spell or trap your opponent controls. this card is really good. Immediate S tier. Because what makes this card so good is it is completely generic. Any deck could make it as long as they have two monsters. You can discard a card and just pop a back row. You can pop a set back row to destroy your opponent's interruptions before they can activate them. Or you can destroy your opponent's floodgates, like Necro Valley, even though we don't really have a lot of powerful floodgates in Duel Links. We still have cards like Necro Valley, and also face up continuous spell trap cards like Eternal Soul, uh, stuff like that, or even World Legacy Secrets. So this card is just really easy to make and helps you just destroy your opponent's back row. So next card is Ningirsu. Okay, Ningirsu is a link free, similar to Code Talker, but free it needs link monsters for its material. So you can't just use your monsters directly. You need to use only link monsters to make this out. But it is not as hard as you might think it might be. It is still quite easy to summon using the link ones that we have, but that also means that it is not as easily summoned as other cards like Nightmare Phoenix or Nightmare Unicorn. But it does have a pretty good effect. It allows you to send one card you control to the graveyard to send one card your opponent controls to the graveyard. And this effect does not target and it does not destroy, so it gets around most protection effects that your opponent's monsters might have. So this effect might be even better than effects like Nightmare Unicorn in certain decks like Salamangreats, because Unicorn requires you to discard a card from your hand, but Ningusu just lets you send a card from your field to the graveyard. And if you have a useless card that you have stuck on your field, which Salads always have their field spell that they could send, it is a really good cost, which doesn't hinder yourself too much. And but the main problem of this card is that not every deck has a good way of making it. And most decks would just rather make Nightmare Unicorn. Speaking of which, I'll just put that in S tier first because it's just a better version of Ningirsu most of the time. You can just discard a card and then spin a card your opponent controls back to the deck. It's just good removal for monsters, good removal for back row. It doesn't destroy, so it gets around destruction protection, and any deck could make it. So there's really not much of a reason for decks to not play it. And in Gears 2, I'll put it in B tier. Its effect is definitely really good, but the main problem is just not every deck could make use of its cost, and not a lot of decks could actually summon it very consistently. So, kind of like the Galaxy package, it is quite strong in decks that could use it, but in terms of how good it is in general in a lot of decks, it is not that useful. Okay, next card is Nightmare Shark. A generic rank 3, requires 2 level 3 monsters, and it can attack directly by detaching a material, and it has 2000 attack. So that's half your starting life points, and that's quite a lot. So a lot of the times for rank 3 decks, they would always try to use this card because if your opponent has less than 2000 attack, 2000 life points, you can just attack directly with this card and just win. So even though your opponent can disrupt it with just any back row, it's just a good backup option to always have in case your opponent has a bunch of monsters but have a pretty low amount of life points. It's just a good card to have in your extra deck. So, and a lot of rank 3 decks do play this card, so I'll put it in A tier. And also it is quite easy to summon in a lot of decks. So yeah. Nightmare Mermaid is an interesting card. So the reason why this card is played is because there is a card that exists called Nightmare Corruptor Ibli. That monster will summon itself in your opponent's side of the field, and your opponent can only special summon monsters that are link monsters. So if your opponent doesn't play Link monsters, you basically lock them out of special summoning entirely. So what this does is it is a Link 1 monster that you can use with your Ibli to get you out of the lock. But people usually use Link Disciple and not Corruptor Ibli. So the both of the cards do pretty much the same role. It's just Ibli is limited to two. Mermaid is limited to two, and also Link Disciple also has a secondary effect that allows you to draw one card by attributing a monster. And also, it is only useful to do that one specific thing of outing an Ibli lock. It itself doesn't do a lot. So, and also its usefulness will drop drastically when Ibli locks don't see a lot of play. So, yeah, I'll put it in C2. But it is still quite a good idea to use this card in every deck you have during this meta because some decks are in fact playing the Ibli lock. So, yeah, I won't put this on D tier. And the next card we have is Steel Swarm Roach. This is a rank 4 monster that can negate special summons. It negates special summons of level 5 or higher monsters. And this only negates inherent special summons. It doesn't negate effect special summons. And that is another long topic that I could keep talking about. But basically, what you have to know is this only negates a specific kind of special summon. It doesn't negate fusion summons. It doesn't negate special summon that comes from an effect. It only negates stuff like pendulum summoning, synchro summoning, and yeah, stuff like that. So with links already out and also Xyz monsters, they don't have levels, so it can't negate those special summons. It is a lot less useful, but against certain decks, if you know your opponent is playing a certain deck that does special summon high level monsters, you could just Xyz summon this card and you could win the game entirely if you summon this card against a certain deck that needs to special summon high level monsters. So it is still a good card to always have in your extra deck in case your opponent is playing one of those decks. But I would say its usefulness is definitely lower than cards like Abyss Dweller, which has more applications. But it is still a good option to just always have in your toolbox. So I would still put it in B2. And also it's still quite easy to summon because it's just a generic rank 4 that requires 2 level 4s. Okay, next card is Firewall Dragon. Firewall Dragon is a link 4, which has an effect to bounce your opponent's monsters when it is co-linked, and also special summon Cyberse monsters from your hand. This card is not very good generically. It is good in Cyberse decks and Code Talker decks, but those decks aren't really good right now, and also other decks just don't really need to use this card, and also it is hard to summon because it is a link 4. Its effect can only be active when it is co-linked, so you need another link monster to point to this card. It's just too hard to get any value off of this Firewall Dragon in just a generic sense. So I will put it in D2. Yeah. And the next card is Trishula. We'll also talk about the level 11 Trishula just together. Okay, so Trishula, the level 9 Trishula is from a bundle. It is basically free to obtain by just spending a few gems. You can just guarantee to get a copy of this card. And it is quite powerful. It is a level 9 synchro that banishes a card from your opponent's hand, field, and graveyard. And it doesn't target, it doesn't destroy. It is good to counter cards from the graveyard. It is good to counter cards that cannot be destroyed, cannot be targeted, and also rips a card from your opponent's hand, which is really good. But the main problem of this card is how hard it is to summon. Not a lot of decks can summon this card, even if they are playing tuners. First of all, it is a synchro monster, so you must play tuners to summon this card. And also, you have to use 3 monsters to summon this card because it says it needs 1 tuner and 2 or more non-tuner monsters. So it is definitely really powerful, but in terms of you should in- how you should invest on this card, I think it should be in a C tier because it's not really useful in a wide variety of decks. Yeah, but if your deck can summon this card, you should definitely play it. And we'll also talk about the level 11 Trish. It is a bit less good than the level 9 Trish because it's level 11. And also, it doesn't banish from the graveyard and also doesn't banish from the hand. But it does banish 3 cards from the field. But similarly to Trishula, it is also quite hard to summon. And I would say I'll put this 1 rank lower than the regular Trishula just because it's a bit harder to summon. And also, Trishula also banishes from the graveyard and hand, which is quite good. And quite often, you don't actually need to banish all 3 cards from your opponent's out of field. Sometimes they only have 2 or 1 card on the field, which means your banish free effect will be wasted. It also has the floating effect to float into Trishula, but that effect isn't used that often. It also doesn't trigger if your opponent just doesn't destroy it. If your opponent just banishes it or returns it to the extra deck, it won't trigger its floating effect. Okay, next card is Code Talker. This card is free. Everyone has this card. Is a generic link 2 that boosts its attack by 500 for each monster it points to, and it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects if it points to a monster. It's quite good for a free link 2 because while its attack isn't very high, it does protect itself from being destroyed by battle or card effects. There are still better link 2s than this card. Cards like Security Dragon or Um, Brute Enforcer are just better cards overall, but I still think it deserves a B tier for how generic it is, how easy it is to obtain because it's just free, you just get it automatically, and just how it protects itself from destruction, which may be useful. And next card we have is Break Sword. Break Sword is another generic rank free, similar to Nightmare Shock, and this card actually destroys your opponent's cards. But in order to use its destruction effect, you have to destroy your own card and do a 1-for-1 trade, basically. But it is still really good because it is generic, is a rank 3, so it is quite easy to summon. You just need 2 level 3s. And also, it just destroys anything. You can destroy back row, you can destroy monsters. It's just generic card removal. So, I would put this in an A tier because if your deck plays level 3 monsters, chances are you will play this card. Next card is Brute Enforcer. Brute Enforcer is a link 2 that can destroy a monster, I believe. I don't remember if it destroys spells or traps as well. Yeah, Brute Enforcer targets a face up card. And then if your opponent discards a card with the same type, they can negate the effect, but if they don't, you get to destroy the card. So this card is best used when your opponent has no cards in their hand. So if you just use any 2 monsters to link summon this card, you can pop a monster for free. You can just pop a monster by discarding a card. Uh, but there are better link twos like Nightmare Phoenix and also Nightmare Unicorn, which is better to guarantee to remove one monster your opponent controls, but it is still good. It is arguably better than Code Talker and Decode Talker because you can either force your opponent to discard a monster or you can just pop a monster your opponent controls, which is both quite good. So A tier. It is still one of the best link twos that we have currently in game. Okay, next card is Giant Hand. Giant Hand is a generic rank 4 again, but this time it negates monster effects. Negating monster effects is more generic than negating level 5 or higher special summons because almost every deck uses monster effects, so it is basically always useful. I would still not put it in S tier because it is not really there there are still better rank fours than Giant Hand, and I would say it's probably a similar tier with Abyss Dweller. It also less useful when you're going second because it can't really do a lot to remove your opponent's threats if they're already on the field. And also doesn't destroy the monster it's negating. It only negates the effect. It leaves it on the field afterwards. So it's still good. So A tier. Next card is Vermilion Dragon Mech. In a Synchro monster, a level 9 Synchro monster, it is a bit easier to summon than Trishula. It pops a card on field by banishing a tuner. Even though it's easier to summon than Trish, I think the effect is a lot worse. It destroys, it targets, you need to banish a tuner, and also doesn't do anything to cards in the grave and hand. So D tier. You also need to play high level monsters and tuners to reliably summon this card. So in terms of how generic the card is and how worth it is to invest in a synchro monster that is not really that good, I would say it should stay in a lower tier. Black Rose Dragon is a bit better than Vermilion. It is a bit easier to summon because it is only level 7. It also wipes the entire field, and also decks like Rose Dragons do regularly summon discard as part of their strategy. So it is a bit better than Dragon Mech, but again, it is still a synchro monster. And just in general, synchro monsters are just not that good to invest in because you need to play tuners to summon synchro monsters. So I couldn't put it higher than a C2. Okay, next card is Nightmare Cerberus. Immediate S tier. All Nightmare monsters, probably except Mermaid for now, are S tier cards because they are generic and they remove cards from opponent's field. Cerberus discards a card and destroys a special summoned monster in the main monster zone. So it is really useful to just clear your opponent's threats. A lot of times you will go into one of the two Nightmare Link monsters and then use another monster to go into Unicorn and then just spin another card. So yeah, Cerberus is just still really generic, good monster removal, even though it only destroys monsters from the main monster zone. But a lot of decks still special summon from the main monster zone, so that isn't quite a big of a limitation of the card. You're saying it's A tier? I think Cerberus is still good. I think it's good enough for S tier. I think Cerberus is still in terms of the power level of link monsters we have in Duel Links. I think it still deserves an S tier, even though Phoenix and Unicorn are probably better. But I still think Cerberus is still good. It's still S tier material. Okay, next card is Big Eye. Big Eye, rank 7. If your deck plays level 7 monsters, you should play this card again. But not a lot of decks can summon this card, so it is not really worth investing. C tier, I guess. Same tier as Sky Prison. But again, similar to Sky Prison, its effect is not bad. Its effect is quite good. But the main problem is again, it's hard for a lot of decks to actually summon it. Yeah, it is good in odd eyes, but not a lot of other decks can summon this card very easily. So I'll just leave it in C2. Next card is Malevolent Sin. This is probably the best rank 4 that we ever have in Duel Links. It is a really good generic rank 4 that banishes an opponent's monster even though it returns to your opponent's half field in your opponent's next standby phase. Usually, when you summon this card, you're going for an OTK, so that doesn't really matter. And also, it doesn't destroy, and it has a decent amount of attack. And how easy it is to summon, it definitely deserves an S tier. Yeah. Um, you might argue that Dark Rebellion is similar to Maleficent in that it is both really good generic rank fours that uh can just win you the game. I would personally think that Maleficent is a bit better because it also removes the monster. And I think banishing the monster is just a bit better than the effect of Dark Rebellion. You know what? I might just put Dark Rebellion along with Maleficent. Yeah, because uh, Dark Rebellion actually destroys the monsters, and also it keeps the attack boost. Yeah, it also keeps the attack boost until just permanently. It doesn't lose the attack boost. So even if you can't go for an OTK, it still uh, retains the attack boost. And for Maleficent, if you banish your opponent's monster and you fail to OTK, the monster comes back. Yeah, yeah, I'll just put them both in S tier. That makes sense. Okay, next card is Dreadnought. Is the Dreadnought? Yeah. When we're talking about Dreadnought, we have to talk it along with the Great Magnus because Dreadnought is used to summon Magnus from your extra deck. I think it is not as good as the other rank fours because you actually need to destroy monsters by battle with this card. It is quite a interesting combo, but first of all, it's only good when you're going second, and also you have to destroy monster by battle. And yeah, certainly, Great Magnus is a really powerful card. It is rank 12. It has 3600 attack, 3400 defense. It has a quick effect to spin your opponent's cards back to the deck. It's definitely just a really strong boss monster. It's also really cheap compared to the other rank 4s because both of them are only R rarity. Yeah, and then Magnus doesn't target, it doesn't destroy. It's just really the Magnus is just really good, and Dreadnought could help summon it. But the main problem is just that if you're trying to make a rank 4, you would not likely pick Dreadnought because uh you only pick Dreadnought when you are going second and you cannot OTK. And for some reason, your opponent has a low attack monster on the field that has lower attack than Dreadnought, and you're not going for something like a Dark Rebellion. It is best to use in decks like Mechlords because both of them are machine, but I think in most cases you would just much rather just make other rank fours. So and also if you're making Dreadnought, you could have been making other things like Sin to go to OTK or Xyz Dragon to beat over your opponent's monster. There aren't actually a lot of situations where you can't go for OTK, but your opponent has a monster with lower attack than Dreadnought. And a lot of the times, if you are in that situation, you are already winning, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like a win more card. In terms of it being a wall, it is not very useful. If you want a defensive rank 4, there are plenty of other options. You can always choose Abyss to counter the graveyard, Giant Hand to negate monsters, Roach to negate special summons, or even other rank 4s like Utopia to negate attacks, or just stuff like that. So yeah, I definitely not put it above A. I'll put it maybe in a B or even C. I think in B or C tier. Uh, I think I might put it in C tier. Yeah, C tier. Yeah, C tier. Okay, next card is Utopia. Utopia is not good on its own. The reason why people are playing Utopia is because of Utopia Ray. Its upgraded version allows you to go for OTK if your life points is lower than 1,000. And it is similar to Dark Rebellion in that it lowers your opponent's attack to raise its own attack, but unlike Dark Rebellion, it always has a 4,000 attack. So if you reduce your opponent's monster's attack to 0, you can just directly go for OTK. So the Utopia combo can always go for a 4,000 attack battle damage if your opponent has a monster with 3,000 attack or lower. But the main problem is the combo only works when your life points are lower than 1,000 because you can only use the effect of Utopia Ray when your life points is lower than 1,000, and that is the main problem. I think the combo is not very good. You would much rather just play other generic rank 4s. And because both Utopia and Utopia Ray are URs, I think it's really not worth investing. I think at least for cards like Dreadnought, they are just low rarity, so it doesn't really hurt that much if you really try to get them. But honestly, Utopia is C tier or maybe even D tier. I think Utopia itself is definitely a D tier. But if you also account for Utopia Ray, Utopia Ray might be in C tier, but I don't have it in the tier list, so I'll just put it in D. Yeah. Okay. We have two cards left in the tier list, and this is Puzzlomino. Puzzlomino is really good. It is a generic Link 2, but it needs two monsters with different levels. So you can't use Link monsters, you can't use Xyz monsters for material, and you can only use two monsters with different levels. It has a level modulation effect. If you're playing a Synchro or Xyz deck, you can always just summon a monster into a zone that it points to, and then it will change the level to 1 or 1 to 8. You can pick whatever level you want. And Puzzlomino also has another effect to destroy your opponent's monsters with the condition to also destroy a monster with the same level that you control. So even if you're not playing a single like C stack, you can just summon a monster to a zone that it points to, change its level to another monster on your opponent's side of the field, and you can just pop both monsters. So it is still quite good, but its usefulness is definitely a lot lower if you are not playing a synchro based or Xyz deck. I would say probably a A or B. I still think probably Brute Enforcer is just better overall than Puzzlomino. It's just more good in more in general in more generic decks. So I'm going to put it over in B2. Okay, last card, Security Dragon. Security Dragon is a generic Link 2. It's really generic. It says two monsters. You can use any two monsters as material. Even though it is only available in a selection box for now, it has the effect to to bounce one monster your opponent controls if this card is co-linked. And actually, to co-link a Link 2 monster isn't really that hard. You just need a Link 1 monster that points down, or a Link 2 monster that points down, which aren't really hard to summon. Or you can just summon in a zone that your opponent's Link monster is pointing to. So Security Dragon's effect is really not that hard for a lot of decks to actually use. But yeah, I would say it is an A tier because its effect is quite good. It doesn't destroy, it bounces, and it is quite easy to summon. I think it's definitely worth an A tier, but not S tier because you still need to find a way to co-link Security Dragon. Yeah. So unlike Firewall Dragon, which is a link 4, Security Dragon is a lot easier to summon because it's only a link 2. So yeah, I would say A tier is the best for it. Okay, so I guess that's the end of the tier list. So obviously this is just based on my own opinion. Of course, you can disagree with the some cards, and also I also made this tier list based on how generic the cards are and how worth it is for players to invest on. So, for example, if you're a new player, you should definitely prioritize cards in the S tier first because they can be used in the most amount of decks that you will build. And the cards in C or D tier aren't necessarily bad, they're just not as generic as the other cards and not that worth wasting your money or gems on. So, um, that's the end of the video, I guess. Uh, just tell me what your rankings will be in the comments if you disagree in some of the placings of some of the cards. And thanks for watching. Goodbye.